Welcome back to the Emily Show. Thank you guys for being here. We have much to catch up on. Why? Well, because we've been in trial and it came to a screeching and abrupt end that I don't think any of us were expecting. So today we have some quick trial updates, but there's also been a ton of movement in the David investigation. Remember, this is the singer who got his start on social media and YouTube, who is a suspect. And there was much consternation among the legacy media about whether he was a person of interest or a suspect or whatever in the disappearance and death of Celeste Rivas Hernandez, whose remains were located in the front trunk of David's Tesla. And that case is ongoing. There haven't been any arrests made. However, there is a grand jury going on in Los Angeles about it, and we have to talk about it. There's also some updates with regard to Courthouse Becky, former clerk of court. Just a quick update, but we're going to do a full live stream about the clerk of court in the Murdaugh case, because we also need to cover Murdaugh's appeal that's going to be going before the Supreme Court in South Carolina, and Jen Shah, who we covered on this channel back when she was originally arrested. You know, it should have been in the parking lot for Beauty Lab and Laser, but it wasn't. But back when she was arrested to now with her getting out of custody, there's some confusion about that. There's some discussion of whether she sued the warden and what's going on with that. That's not a new lawsuit, but we'll talk about it anyway. Much to update you here today. With all of that, we should just get into it. I'm legal analyst Emily D. Baker, yes, also a lawyer, and this is The Emily Show. I break down the pop culture, entertainment, and high-profile cases that we're all talking about. I know you want the facts, so let's get into it. For those of you who do not remember the David case or the conversation about the investigation into the death of Celeste Rivas Hernandez, a quick timeline for you is that back in September, remains were located in the front trunk of David's Tesla. It was a Tesla registered to him. He was out on tour. He had grown on social media through songs that he had put out on social and then picked up a record deal or a recording deal, whatever they call them these days. I'm old. I use the language of the olds. And had been out on tour, had massive partnerships that were getting ready to launch with Crocs and others, and had been really well received both on social media and legacy media. Had a song in like Fortnite and anime and what have you. Well, when the human remains were found in the front trunk of a Tesla registered to him, a lot of questions were raised. And because he had streamed on Twitch quite a lot and was popular on social media, people started going back and looking at his past streams and starting connecting him to missing, well, at the time, I think 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez, who had been missing from Lake Elsinore, California. And people online started seeing clips of her in some of his streams and started finding individuals that streamed with him saying that they thought that they were friends and that she was older than 14 years old. And some reports have her listed as 15, some 14. I refer to her as 14 years old because based on what we now know from the investigation of this case, I think unfortunately she was deceased prior to her 15th birthday. So you might see some variance on the age that she was listed as, but I think it's important to note that she did go missing when she was 13 and then had been back home and then had been missing again and was connected to the singer David before what were later identified as her remains were located in the car registered to him. So this has been going on since early September 2025, but it wasn't until September 19th that the tour he was actively on was canceled. The reason I mention the tour is because it comes up in some of the reporting that we're going to talk about today with regard to those that are now in front of the grand jury in Los Angeles County. And a note about grand juries in Los Angeles, well, and elsewhere, but particularly in Los Angeles, yes, grand juries are secretive. However, courthouses are public, and grand juries in Los Angeles take place in a public courthouse where a lot of other shit is going on. So even though there is a grand jury room, you can see people walking back and forth from that grand jury room if you're in the hallway on that floor. And that's how we're getting some of the reporting that we're getting today from those that were in the hallway related to other things that overheard what might be going on in this grand jury. And I've seen some questions. I've also seen some confusion regarding what it all means. And that's where I think we need to catch up on what's going on in the David case. So let's take a look first at some reporting from the LA Times confirming that a grand jury was convened at the end of November 2025. We are looking at reporting from the LA Times. It says LA grand jury hears mystery of dead teen stuffed in trunk of David's Tesla. Sources say, I hate the headline as much as you do, but it's visceral. This reporting is coming from James Qualley and Richard Winton. I quite like James's court reporting in Los Angeles. So if you don't follow him on social, he generally has the scoop. This is from November 26, 2025. The beginning of this reporting says a Los Angeles grand jury is hearing evidence related to the death of a teenage girl whose body was discovered inside the trunk of singer David's Tesla early this year. Two law enforcement sources told the LA Times. This is being investigated by, and this is me interjecting, not the article, but this is being investigated by LAPD Robbery Homicide Division, or RHD, and they have been incredibly quiet about this case. We have heard small snippets about this investigation, and it doesn't surprise me. We are dealing with at this point, unknown cause of death. We are dealing with remains that were not in easy condition to autopsy, and we are dealing with a high-profile investigation. I'm not surprised they've been quiet, but it's been a couple of months. The article goes on to say the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office has begun presenting evidence to what's known as an investigative grand jury, according to one of the sources who spoke on the condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to discuss the case with the media. That doesn't surprise me. Also, one of the things we need to talk about: what is the difference between a grand jury and an investigative grand jury, and why might that be used? Now, this is a source not from the district attorney's office speaking to the media. So there is always the possibility that the source may be incorrect. That's possible. An investigative grand jury might be used if individuals are refusing to speak to law enforcement, and the best way to get them to come in and talk about what happened is to subpoena them and bring them into court and sit them on a stand and ask them questions. Remember, at a grand jury, there might not be just one target of the grand jury investigation. And with an investigative grand jury, it might be that a grand jury says, hey, you should charge multiple people, versus, hey, you should charge one person, or hey, this is what the charges should be, versus the district attorney coming into the grand jury saying, hey, we want to charge person A with crime B. What do you think? Indict? Good, let's go. So it might be a longer process simply because law enforcement is hitting roadblocks, which who could imagine somebody in the music industry surrounded by managers and others hitting roadblocks? That seems so shocking to me. So maybe an investigative grand jury is really the only way to start asking questions about what's happening. Also, law enforcement can't generally grant people immunity if immunity is necessary to get to the heart of what happened here. But in a grand jury, you do have the opportunity where different types of immunity might be granted to start to get information from individuals about what happened. So if law enforcement was getting stonewalled, then an investigative or investigating grand jury might help. And investigating grand juries can say, hey, we need subpoenas. Can you go get these phone records? Hey, can I see the Discord DMs? Do you have those? No, go get them. Bring them to us. So there is more that can be done during that type of grand jury than just saying, hey, grand jury, this is the case. Do you think we should indict? Great, there's the charges. So it's possible that it is an investigative grand jury. It's possible that it's kind of a combination of both, and they are expecting this grand jury to return indictments at the end, and they are using it to continue investigating and talk to individuals that might not have talked to law enforcement. Numerous sources said that one of the managers was before the grand jury for multiple days. Now, for grand jury testimony, that's a real long time. And it might be because they hadn't really fulsomely vetted what they had to say with law enforcement, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll get back there soon. So yes, it is possible that an investigative grand jury is convened. It's also possible that that grand jury can choose to recommend charges or indictments at the end of this. It depends on the way the district attorney's office chooses to go forward with that. Hey, Leonard, I know it's getting to be that time of season when you are worried what the right gift might be, or if you can get it there in time. And today's sponsor, Aura Frames, has a gift for anyone you want to share photos with, whether that is a family member, loved one, or you just want to share photos back and forth with your bestie. Aura Frames can preload photos when you send them, and you can use your app to send photos to any of the Aura frames that you're connected to, and you can let family members and friends send photos to your frame. Look, the frame we have in our home, the Carver matte frame, is a favorite. It's in our living room and matches with the other things that we have there. But when it comes to my Aura frame in the office, I don't let anyone connect to that because I don't know what they'll put up during live stream. So that one is EDB only. Leonard, if you're ready to check out Aura Frames for yourself or as the perfect gift, for a limited time, you can save by visiting auraframes.com to get $35 off their best-selling Carver matte frames. They are named #1 by Wirecutter by using code EDB at checkout. That's auraframes.com with code EDB. This deal is exclusive for listeners, and frames do sell out, so order yours now to get it in time for the holidays. And if they ask how you heard about them, let them know it was The Emily Show. And of course, terms and conditions apply. Now let's get back to it. The article goes on to say one of the sources said that the grand jury was in session for several days in mid-November, but it was unclear whether prosecutors had completed their presentation of evidence. No, because things have continued into December. They go on to say prosecutors may convene an investigative grand jury to subpoena witnesses and compel other evidence, including videos. They can do a bunch of subpoenaing and discovery. Such investigative panels may recommend charges, but cannot themselves return an indictment. Emily, you just said that. You should have kept reading. Sure. In addition to the two law enforcement sources, a court petition provided to the LA Times on Monday contained a GJ number referencing the existence of a grand jury. And this doesn't surprise me, seeing that the coroner's case is also now sealed. Sealing the coroner's case might indicate that it is being brought up at a grand jury. Things at a grand jury are still secret, whether it's investigative or whether it's charging or whether it's a combination of the two. And then the article goes on to discuss the sealing of the coroner's case. In the grand jury number document that the LA Times just referenced, they say that LAPD Detective Joshua Bryars of RHD, or robbery homicide, successfully persuaded a judge to, it sounds like they did more than just ask for it. No, they asked a judge to bar the LA County medical examiner from divulging autopsy results and other details related to the girl's death that would otherwise be public. Look, I know there's probably people that are going to be frustrated with this. I'm sure there are members of the media that are frustrated by this. It's the autopsy of a minor. I have no problem with it being sealed forever. There are some things that people just don't necessarily need to know. If this goes to trial, then that will be known. If it doesn't go to trial, am I all that pressed about the autopsy results of a minor who was missing and then found discarded in a trunk remaining private? No, because there's already so much known surrounding how she was recovered. I'm fine if they leave that sealed. Also, while a grand jury is convened, it's appropriate that it's sealed. I think there is a boundary between the right of the public to know and transparency of the courts and protections for victims. Even though the cause of death of Celeste Rivas Hernandez is not known, she did not end up where she was recovered on her own. And so something happened. Exactly what that is, it seems like a grand jury is trying to figure it out. But leave it sealed, fine. The article goes on to say that it was Bryars who characterized the probe into the girl's death as an investigation into murder, according to the document. Deputy District Attorney Beth Silverman, who handles some of the county's most high-profile murder cases, has called several witnesses before the grand jury, according to one of the law enforcement sources. Silverman did not immediately respond to requests for comment Wednesday. I imagine that Silverman's not going to respond to requests for comment while a grand jury is convened. It's a secret proceeding. But if anyone is involved in this case and getting a subpoena to be questioned by Beth Silverman, I'm sure that their attorneys have told them to tell the truth and be very, very mindful, because this is a DA that's not going to play with you at all, like at all. So I'm not surprised that Silverman did not respond to requests for comment. It goes on to say that the district attorney's office said in a statement that it could not, quote, disclose any information about grand jury proceedings. Correct. An LAPD spokesman referred the LA Times to a statement earlier this week, which did not address the existence of a grand jury because they're secret. However, they are on a very populated floor of the criminal courthouse. So it goes on to say that the attorney for the 20-year-old singer, whose real name is David Anthony Burke, did not respond to requests for comment. Right. Detectives have spent months investigating the circumstances surrounding the girl's death, as well as her relationship with David. The performer's Tesla was abandoned on the street of the Hollywood Hills for several weeks before it was removed. A tow yard worker noticed a foul smell coming from the Tesla and alerted LAPD. The article goes on to say that inside the trunk, police found a black bag containing Celeste's remains. She weighed 71 pounds. The remains, those are the remains. This is not a comment on her weight in life prior to whatever happened. This is the remains, which I'm not going to delve into anymore, other than there was information that can be gleaned from that, but that goes to the weight of the remains. But it did say that there was a tattoo on her index. It doesn't say index finger, but we know it was on her index finger. Those were according to details released by the medical examiner prior to the court order. They go on to say that Celeste's body was recovered the day after her 15th birthday. LAPD Captain Scott Williams, who leads RHD, said that the girl had been, quote, dead for at least several weeks. On Monday, Williams said that the body had not been decapitated or frozen, as some media outlets have reported. I get very frustrated when the media runs with things that are not known to be true as if they are true, because it sends things spiraling off sideways. The facts that we do know in this are sad and troubling. And I don't think there's any need, but you know this about me, to further sensationalize something that is already quite horrific. So I appreciate that Robbery Homicide, who has been fairly quiet about this investigation, has at least corrected the record on that, because they're not obligated to. I appreciate that they did. The article goes on to say that investigators believe that more than one person was involved in the handling of the teen's body in the months before her remains were found, according to two law enforcement sources familiar with the inquiry. LAPD Chief Alan Hamilton, who serves as the department's chief of detectives, said this week that accountability is coming. Quote, our RHD detectives have been working. They are going to get justice for Celeste Rivas. And yes, I have seen her name in the media, both Rivas and Rivas Hernandez. And I think I have used both somewhat interchangeably, but I have seen her referred to both as Celeste Rivas and as Celeste Rivas Hernandez. Just making that note as we are getting into the chief's quote here for the LA Times, saying that they are going to get justice for Celeste Rivas. Quote, no one is off the table, including him, referring to David. Hamilton said, contrary to some reports, investigators haven't sought the performer's cooperation. Yeah, that was his team that said he was cooperating fully with law enforcement. That was his team that said that, not law enforcement. They go on to say that on Monday, and remember this article is coming from the end of November, they go on to say that on Monday, the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's Office revealed that it had been barred from disclosing any details about the death by the court order. The chief medical examiner, Dr. Ukupo, I think is the proper pronunciation. I could be wrong, doctor. Apologies. Chief coroner seemed to question the wisdom of sealing the department's findings, saying, quote, the practice of security holds is virtually unheard of in other counties and has not been proven to improve outcomes in the legal system. We are dedicated to serving our community with full transparency. However, the law precludes us from doing so while the court order remains in this case. Again, if it bars her family from knowing what's going on, I would take a little bit more issue with it. If it just bars it from being released publicly, the public and the media do not need access to the autopsy report of a 14-year-old, in my opinion. I think there are other ways that there can be transparency, but that is my opinion. I am not in charge. The article goes on to say that in his court declaration, Byers wrote that making autopsy and medical findings public, quote, will reveal or tend to reveal the ongoing investigation and the integrity of the investigation, as well as the identity of witnesses and or informants who are cooperating with law enforcement. It goes on to say that disclosure, quote, could endanger the lives of witnesses and or compromise the investigation. LA County Superior Court Judge Craig Richmond agreed and granted the LAPD's request that the medical examiner's findings be sealed pending another court decision. It's not surprising to me that, again, those findings remain sealed, especially with an ongoing grand jury. And if that's an investigative grand jury, they also don't want to taint any of the witnesses with information that might come out from coroner findings that are immediately going to be all over the media and social media. So making sure that the witnesses have testified before the grand jury, before those findings are public, at least helps mitigate that the reason this person might have known that is because of XYZ. So with that, we have to look at what's going on currently. So from the LA Times reporting that a grand jury has been convened, who the DA seems to be, the investigative unit, the fact that David is in fact a suspect, the fact that this is a murder investigation, though it becomes more difficult when a cause of death can't be determined. We don't know if a cause of death has been determined at this point. We know that earlier in this investigation, the coroner's office had deferred those findings and said that they were not making a finding yet. They were waiting on reports to come back. We also know that it was apparent that these remains were not in the easiest condition to maybe ascertain what had happened. And you can see where prosecutors can struggle with that in a case where if you don't have a cause of death, I think when remains are recovered, it makes it a little easier to at least explain why a cause of death couldn't be determined. But we've been watching Massachusetts prosecutors address that question in the Brian Walsh case. Here, there are remains recovered. There will be more information that can be gleaned from them than in the Walsh case. But now we know that a grand jury is underway. Let's take a look at information that started coming in at the very end of last week, December 9th, 10th, 11th. All right, we are going to an article from KTLA from December 10th, headlined, David's label exec faces grand jury questioning and teen's death, reports say. The article starts with an executive at the record label of rising R&B singer David faced some tough questions in front of a grand jury this week, according to reports. Robert Morganoff, general manager of Mogul Vision, testified Monday. Remember, this was last week while we were in trial in Massachusetts. This was going down in the grand jury. So the grand jury did not complete at the end of November. It's ongoing, and grand juries can be ongoing in this way. So the general manager of Mogul Vision testified Monday in connection with the death of teenager Celeste Rivas Hernandez, whose body was found in the Tesla registered to the singer David. According to TMC, which cited sources that allegedly overheard Morganroth on the phone in the hallway outside the courtroom, Morganroth felt LA County Deputy District Attorney Beth Silverman was, quote, very pushy on why I didn't call the police regarding the incident. Yeah, I bet she was. Yeah, I bet DA Silverman did have some thoughts. I wonder if it was in connection to the teenager that was around all the time that was then suddenly not around anymore. I bet she had a lot of questions. Pushy. Direct? She was direct? She was maybe a little frustrated that nobody called law enforcement when the 14-year-old wasn't around anymore? Perhaps? Yeah. I bet she was. I bet you haven't even begun to see the direct side of DA Silverman. I hope you don't want to, but you might. Morganroth allegedly answered Silverman by explaining that, quote, I feel like I didn't have the responsibility to do that and just wanted to continue with the tour. Oh. Well, I mean, I guess being on tour is going to make you more money, right? Then again, your artist being involved in all of this sure brought that tour to a screeching halt, didn't it? Emily? Presumption of innocence. Yes, yes. Just because someone is questioned by a grand jury doesn't mean that they did anything nefarious. However, there are a lot of things that are within the bounds of the law that are not the proper call. Would Morgenroth have had an obligation to call law enforcement? Maybe not. However, does it appear to be the right thing to do? Yes. Also, the hallways in the courthouse are public. So if you are a witness in a grand jury and then you step out into the hallway and get on the phone to tell somebody what just happened to the grand jury, someone is going to overhear it. And I'm not surprised that it's according to TMZ, because TMZ has sources at the courthouses daily. Also, witnesses are generally not obligated to keep what they say to the grand jury secret unless there is a particular non-disclosure or gag order in place for those witnesses. But also, part of a grand jury being secret keeps people from being sus about the witnesses. But you sussed yourself on this one. This is you being a menace in the hallway to yourself. Don't think that no one's going to overhear you in a courthouse. Those hallways echo. Come on. So what did TMZ learn in the hallway? I listened to Harvey Levin's podcast with Mark Garrigus about this, and TMZ had someone that was in the hallway for another proceeding that just happened to see all this go down. I mean, what are the odds? But also TMZ always has people in the hallways of the courthouses because so much is going on in LA courthouses. And I'm glad they were, because the DA's office isn't going to comment on this. If they went and knocked on Morgenroth's door and said, hey, did you just testify in front of the grand jury? They're not going to give this statement. So the fact that somebody overheard them on the phone is illuminating as to what they thought about the questioning regarding this case. And that brings us to TMZ's reporting about whether or not a witness before the grand jury will be arrested, also coming from all of the hallway conversations. This article is from TMZ on December 10th that says Celeste Rivas grand jury, uncooperative witness to be arrested, in the largest font you can imagine. And in looking at this article from TMZ, and if you were listening in the background, you won't notice a difference. If you're not, well, there were just too many ads and we went to reader mode because it's just easier for me to read. So let's take a look at what else TMZ overheard in the hallway. The article said there's trouble in the grand jury room where witnesses are testifying about the circumstances surrounding Celeste Rivas's death, because at least one witness is so uncooperative she's about to be arrested, TMZ has learned. I mean, that's really heavy-handed way to say it, but let's just hear what they overheard and then we can editorialize on our own. The article says, here's the way it went down. Beth Silverman, the deputy DA presenting the case in Los Angeles, came out into the hallway Wednesday afternoon and approached attorney Evan Genesis, I think, who represents Robert Morgenroth, who manages singer David, who we were just talking about with the questioning about why they didn't call law enforcement. Silverman told Genesis that she was going to have the judge issue a quote-unquote body attachment. We'll talk about that in a minute because it is sometimes a necessary procedure. Have the judge issue a body attachment to force a female witness to testify before the grand jury. It appears the female witness was a no-show, and a visibly frustrated Silverman said she would have authorities take the female witness into custody to bring her to the courtroom. I've definitely said this to people before. TMZ goes on to clarify, we do not know who the female witness is, but it's interesting she's represented by the same lawyer as Morgenroth. It could be someone else that worked with David from that same company. It could be as simple as that. But they go on to note that Morgenroth spent 3 days testifying before the grand jury. TMZ goes on to say that TMZ broke the story that Morgenroth was in the hallway Monday telling his lawyer that things got tense in the grand jury room when Deputy DA Silverman pressed him on why he didn't call the police. He didn't say what he knew that would make Silverman challenge him on not making the call, but he said he responded to her by saying he didn't think it was his duty and he was trying to keep David's tour going. They go on to say it's unclear if the female witness had some connection to Morgenroth, but it all points to David, they say, whom the DA and LAPD are treating as a suspect in what they say is the murder of Celeste Rivas. So, Emily, what's a body attachment? I don't think we've really talked about body attachments, but essentially it is a warrant that is put out for somebody who violated a subpoena. So if somebody is properly served a subpoena and they don't show up to court and the DA does not have a way to bring them to court, then, well, I mean, law enforcement will just go offer them a ride, but they'll also have an arrest warrant with them and be like, hey, so it seems you couldn't make it to court. We're going to all go together. And they can keep witnesses in custody until their testimony is complete. Now, of course, sometimes people might be afraid to come to court. And once they are brought to court by law enforcement, they don't stay in custody. But if somebody tries to bounce, they will have an arrest warrant issued for them. If they've been subpoenaed and they haven't followed through on that subpoena, they will get arrested. They will be brought to court by law enforcement, and they can stay overnight in custody until their testimony is done. That is never what a DA wants to do. They would prefer that witnesses come to court. There are reasons why witnesses do not want to testify, do not want to come to court, and think that it's not going to be a big deal. They would be incorrect. It is not appearing on a subpoena that you are supposed to appear for is a big deal, and they can get an arrest warrant for you, and they will arrest witnesses and bring them to court. Now, I can tell you from my own experience prosecuting cases, witnesses are super thrilled when they get arrested and brought to court to testify. They're really not happy with that set of circumstances at all. There are witnesses who, for a variety of reasons, might not want to testify, but testifying at an investigative grand jury is a lot more private than testifying in trial. So it will be interesting to see what happens in this grand jury. It will be, well, as much as we know, because everybody's just talking in the hallways, it will be interesting to see what arrests are made, if any arrests are made, if it's just one arrest, if it's not any arrest. But I am going to be very curious to see where this all goes. So if you get subpoenaed to court, go to court. If you're concerned about testifying, say that you're concerned about testifying. If you don't want to answer a question, tell the judge you don't want to answer a question. If you think you need to protect your rights and you think you have a Fifth Amendment right, you can say, I am not answering that. And then it will be dealt with without you being put in jail. Unless the court orders you to answer and then you're held in contempt, and then that becomes a whole nother matter. But it is better to go to court and tell the court why you don't want to testify than just not going to court and having to be brought in handcuffs. Because one way or the other, you're going to end up in court. So as it goes to the updates in the David case, yes, body attachments can be issued for witnesses. Yes, David is a suspect in this case. Yes, they are treating it as a murder investigation, even though at this point we do not know if there is a cause and manner of death that's been determined by the coroner's office, because all those reports are sealed and will likely be sealed until, at a minimum, after grand jury proceedings are concluded. And I imagine after a grand jury proceeding is concluded, if arrests are made, we will see official statements from the district attorney's office and probably from robbery homicide. But this DA is out of the major crimes divisions and not someone that these witnesses are going to want to try. The find out side of the fuck around and find out equation, the find out side is going to be real high on that one. So I'm going to just leave that there, because we need to talk a little bit about somebody who's finding out. Courthouse Becky. Leonard, are you already thinking about the new year? I know I am. Partly because we have a new Leonard shop launch that we are already working on for you coming up in the new year. But you know, the Leonard shop wouldn't be possible without today's sponsor, Shopify. And every time you are starting to do something new, you just want it to be frictionless. And Shopify not only has the best checkout sequence on the internet, and it's not a wonder that so many top shops like your favorite nail polish, your Leonard shop, and so many more rely on Shopify. They also have 24/7 customer service And they do all the pesky things you need, like track your sales tax in every state where you're selling. So they keep you selling and all the way together. Plus, they're built in to automatically connect on Instagram, YouTube, and other social media platforms, so you don't have to know how to handle everything to get your shop up and running quickly and easily. So whether it's your first sale or maybe you're just looking for a streamlined experience and you're ready to move your shop to Shopify, they've got you covered. So Lawnerd, in 2026, stop waiting and start selling with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period and start selling today at shopify.com/Lawnerd. Go to shopify.com/Lawnerd. That's shopify.com/Lawnerd, and you'll hear your first this new year with Shopify by your side. Let's get back to today's episode. If you are wondering what's going on with Courthouse Becky, she did plead guilty to all of the counts she was charged with. There was not a plea deal. If you don't remember who in the world Courthouse Becky is, Clerk of Court Becky Hill from the Murdaugh trial. We watched together on the live stream channel all of the proceedings where Clerk of Court Becky Hill went and told Justice Toll that she didn't do anything wrong and she wasn't talking to the jurors. Well, remember, Becky Hill was charged with 1 count of perjury, 1 count of obstruction of justice, and 2 misdemeanor counts of abuse of her office. We talked about the ethical complaints, a lot of those tied into those abuse of office, including paying herself bonuses that she wasn't entitled to out of funds that were meant to go into the child support system in Colleton County, in addition to using her office and her official role for a photo shoot for her book that ended up getting pulled right off of self-publishing on Amazon because she admitted to plagiarizing part of it. And that came up when she had to sit before Justice Toll in that motion for new trial with Alex Murdaugh. Remember, Murdaugh's team is still alleging that Becky Hill tampered with the jury, and her jury tampering entitles him to a new trial. We have talked about that quite a lot. We will talk about it more in live stream, possibly this week. So stay tuned on the Lawnerd app, because there are some very technical nuances of law, and it will be very interesting to see what South Carolina chooses to do. And if Alex Murdaugh gets a new trial, that is possible. During Becky Hill's open plea to the court and sentencing, the prosecutor laid out that they don't believe there was enough to charge her with jury tampering, right? But if they charged her with jury tampering, then that kind of admits you agree that she messed with the jury then. So there's also some tension between whether or not they charge her with jury tampering and whether or not that entitles Alex Murdaugh to a new trial. So there are some scales there that need to be balanced. But Becky Hill went and took responsibility in front of the court. She didn't say with integrity, though, so I appreciate that, but took responsibility in front of the court, and the court sentenced her to probation. I shared this in the Lawnerd app and on social media. There was not a lot of warm feeling for her receiving 3 years of probation and 100 hours of community service. Yes, there is time suspended, meaning if she messes up on probation, she could go to jail. It's unlikely because messing up on probation would have to be pretty significant for her to go to custody. She needs to get her 100 hours of community service done within that 3 years. And she paid back the county the $11,880 that they say was owed in restitution. And she paid that back on the sentencing date. We'll be talking about this much more on stream. An interesting little note on that. She was back in the courthouse where the Murdaugh trial took place. Yeah. She was the elected clerk of court. She had to walk right back into the courthouse with a different judge sitting on that glorious blue judge chair to take her plea and, admit that she was absolutely fucking around. Unfortunately, the find out was probation and community service. But we're going to talk much more about whether or not Murdaugh will get a new trial, because can you imagine what that even looks like if all this time later we end up in Murdaugh trial 2.0? Yeah. Speaking of all this time later, we need to talk about Jen Shah, because I'm sure many feel like it's not been really nearly all that much time from when she was sentenced and went into custody to now, with her getting out of custody. Some of you remember former Real Housewife of Salt Lake City, Jen Shah. I covered her getting arrested. Well, cameras were rolling, as it turns out, but Jen Shah wasn't at the beauty lab and laser parking lot when law enforcement and NYPD and Homeland Security all rolled up on a Sprinter van looking for Jen Shah. It was one of the most compelling seasons of TV because in real time, we saw Jen Shah going through the criminal prosecution, and then we saw what was happening while cameras were rolling in Utah when that happened. She ended up at the 11th hour pleading guilty to 1 count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud. She was sentenced to 78 months, or just over 6.5 years, back in 2023. And then on December 10th, she was released from Camp Bryant, the federal prison camp in Texas, where, well, a number of high-profile inmates have ended up. I spoke with Nightline briefly about this case, but they also have some exclusive footage of Jen Shah being released from prison. Some of the headlines I've seen that are a little bit confusing are whether or not Jen Shah sued the warden. Yes, she did, but it was a while ago. It was not now. It was like a year ago. And what happens to Jen Shah now? She was only in custody for 33 months. While Jen Shah is not all the way out of confinement, she has been released from the prison camp to either be at a halfway house or on home confinement. And that home confinement will be more onerous than what we've seen from Brian Walsh because this is post-conviction. So she is not all the way out of custody just yet. Her custodial situation has changed to a transition from out of custody. Her official release date is still set for August 2026. So she will be in that transition until August, and then she will be on 5 years of supervision after she is done with her confinement, as it were. As part of that supervision, she is going to be required to maintain work. She is going to have to tell probation when she is leaving the state. She is going to have to keep them informed about what she's doing for the next 5 years. And you might remember that I spoke to ABC back when they released The Housewife and The Shah Shocker. It was kind of their follow-up to the one about the Girardis. And we spoke a little bit then. That's re-aired with Nightline. And I'm going to share it with you again because really, I have not seen more compelling TV, truly, than everyone being shooketh while they were trying to find Jen Shah the day that she was ultimately arrested.
Authorities say she and her co-conspirators targeted and defrauded hundreds of victims.
News starts breaking that Jen Shah gets arrested. Literally my first thought, which is awful, was I wonder if Bravo cameras are rolling. Like Jen Shah's been arrested, our cameras rolling.
Oh my God, there's police and they have handcuffs out.
Homeland Security.
We're looking for Jen Shah.
She just left. Shah faced 2 charges.
And yes, we talked about Jen Shah being at federal prison Camp Bryan. It is a lower security federal facility. And you know I record a lot of our podcasts with the law nerds in the chat, and some of them mentioned, oh, you mean like the kind of facility that Corey Richins was Googling? Yeah, kind of like that, but not as luxurious as maybe Corey Richins was thinking. But Jen Shah was in custody with some high-profile camp mates.
Shah's fellow inmates also infamous, including Jeffrey Epstein associate Ghislaine Maxwell and former Theranos founder Elizabeth Holmes.
It's not surprising to me that high-profile individuals understand the pressures of what that life was like and of being in custody. And I wonder if they have some reminiscing over both of their cases, because both of them really argued that they were just doing business the way everybody else did.
Now, some fans wonder if Shah could return to the franchise.
And I too have been asked if Jen Shah could return to Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. ABC goes on in Nightline, and we'll link that down below, to explain that Andy Cohen said on his radio program on Sirius XM that no, he didn't anticipate Jen Shah being back on Real Housewives. But I don't think we are done seeing Jen Shah. Whether she shares that through her own social media, whether she shares it elsewhere, I think cameras will be following along with her post-prison journey, even if that is done independently and not on the Real Housewives of Salt Lake City. But could you imagine a sit down with Jen Shah post-prison? and those that stood by her and or started throwing her under the bus while she was in custody, that would be incredibly interesting. But it's always nice to get to sit down and chat with ABC. And yes, Jen Shah had sued the warden, saying that her confinement should have been calculated to end in 2025, not 2026. However, there is an addendum to that, because right after Jen Shah was released from custody on December 10th, she filed an emergency petition to withdraw her lawsuit over the calculation of her sentencing date. This is from December 11th, 2025, Shah versus Tanisha Hall, the warden at FPC Camp Bryant. Petitioner Jen Shah, by and through undersigned counsel, respectfully moves this honorable court for leave to withdraw her petition for writ of habeas corpus, which is also probably not the correct vehicle to make the type of complaint that she was making. And there was a motion to dismiss that had been filed that Shah's team had not responded to just yet. Petitioner states as follows. Petitioner filed this habeas petition to challenge the Bureau of Prisons' failure to timely apply her earned time credits under the First Step Act and Second Chance Act, as well as the credits associated with her completion of the residential drug abuse program. The Bureau of Prisons' failure to properly and promptly apply these credits resulted, they argued, in an unlawful delay in her transfer to community confinement, which is where she is now. They're arguing that she was eligible for community confinement earlier. They go on to say, since filing that petition, Shah was released to a halfway house on December 10th, 2025, and is no longer in the custody of FPC Bryant. In light of her release and after consultation with counsel, Shah does not wish to pursue further this litigation. Right. So done. There was a lot of questions regarding the things that Jen Shah did in custody to allow her to be released after 33 months of a 78-month sentence. And you saw some of those things listed out in this document. First of all, there is, for good time, a reduction in time. It is not day to day on her sentence, given the charge that she was sentenced on. That can vary by charges, by offender level, by priors, and things like that. Jen Shah had no priors. This was a nonviolent crime. She didn't have enhancements that would have changed the time that she was serving. Then she participated in the First Step Act and the Second Chance Act, as well as the residential drug abuse program. All of those things will help reduce her sentence and then allow her to be transferred to community confinement, meaning that she can serve out the rest of her sentence in a either halfway house facility or home arrest, which she would then have to pay for. So she had the opportunity to take advantage of those things, and it seems like she did. That is not unusual. It's just something we don't hear a lot. And a lot of the cases that we end up covering together where people are sentenced, they are either sentenced to so much time that we're never going to see them be out of custody, or they're sentenced on violent crimes with more complex sentencing. So we're not seeing them get out of custody as quickly as we're seeing Jen Shah out of custody. Do I think we'll see her on the media or on social media and things like that while she is on her community confinement through August? Probably not a lot. I would imagine that she will keep that fairly restrained. She might have people filming. She might be talking about it, but I imagine she won't do much until she is done with her community confinement in August of 2026. So we will see Jen Shah, I imagine, back on our televisions, if not at least on social media. Let me know what you think, Law Nerds. Thank you for being here. And hopefully this kept you occupied with other things going on in the world of law while you are waiting on verdict watch for the jury to come back in Massachusetts versus Brian Welsh. Don't worry, I'll let you know in the Law Nerd app when we hear anything. If the jury has a question, we'll let you know. If the jury has a verdict, we'll let you know, and we'll talk about it together. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being a Law Nerd. Take care of yourself. Take care of each other. And as we are getting into this holiday season, stay warm and have a good holiday. Cheers. Thanks for joining me. If you enjoyed this episode and don't want to miss updates on your favorite cases, you're going to need the Law Nerd app at lawnerdapp.com. That way you can stay in the loop on the cases that matter most to you, and you never know when you're going to catch feelings for a new case. So make sure you get it for free on iOS and Android. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being a Law Nerd.